Okay, so this is a quick lesson on how to determine where functions are increasing, decreasing, or constant. So let's look at this first example. And then the first example, first of all, keep in mind that I drew this by hand. So I did the best I could with this, with these problems. But basically, when you're looking to determine where a function is increasing, decreasing, or constant, listen to these words. Okay, so just like you would the domain, remember you go from left to right, correct? Okay, so along the x-axis. What I want you to do is to think of it this way. So when you're looking at where a function, where functions are increasing, decreasing, or constant, you're asking yourself this: where are my y values? Where are the y values? Okay, the y values increasing, decreasing, or constant. All right, so you're looking at the y values, and your intervals where those are increasing, decreasing, or constant, where those y values are increasing, decreasing, or constant. You're looking for the x values. You're looking for the x values that make the y values increase, decrease, or constant. Okay, so it's a lot of stuff there, but look at the first example, and I think you understand what this is saying. All right, before I look at the first example, review this. So when determining where functions are increasing, decreasing, or constant, you're looking at kind of two things. First of all, you're looking at where the y value is increasing, decreasing, or constant. All right, and in the process, you're also looking for this. You're looking for the x values that make the y values increasing, decreasing, or constant. All right, so here's the idea. All right, so remember that second part, the x values, that's your domain, right? That's your domain. So what domain will make these y values increase? What domain will make these y values decrease? And what domain will make these y values stay constant? All right, so look at the first example. As I go from left to right, what is happening to these y values? All right, this y value, this y value, this y value, they're increasing, right? So as I go from left to right, my y values are doing what? Your y values are increasing. Then all of a sudden, at this maximum point right here, I meant this right here to be the maximum point. At this maximum point, what are the y values then doing? Well, your y values are doing what? Decreasing. Okay? So for this function right here, your y values are increasing, and then they're doing what? Decreasing. They're never constant. Okay? All right, now here's the way I would do this. Okay, listen to these words. I'm using a colored pen, and that should help you. I would do it this way on every time. All right, so my y values are increasing, right? And then all of a sudden, at this point right here, at this max, what's happening? They decrease. What I would then do is I would draw a colored line right here to separate this x-axis into two parts, from negative infinity, to the y to the x value 4. What are your y values doing? They are increasing. And then from 4 to infinity, what are your y values doing? They are decreasing. Okay? All right, so here's the idea. All right, so let's talk about where they're increasing. All right, and then decreasing, and then constant. Okay? All right. So the answer so what goes here is the part of the domain. You need the part of the domain, all right? The part of the domain that makes the y values increase, decrease, or constant. So I'm going to do this: increase, decrease, and then constant. Okay? So increase, decrease, constant. All right? Okay, so here we go. From negative infinity, so I'll just go along the x-axis, just go along your domain. All right, so as I go along my domain, notice, first of all, notice this. Y'all agree that domain here is from negative infinity to infinity, right? Okay, so we talked about this in the previous lesson. So from negative infinity to 4, what are these y values doing? They are increasing. All right, so here's how you can write this. Negative infinity to 4. Now let me say this. Okay, so when we talk about increasing, decreasing, or constant, you're always going to use parentheses. All right. I'm not asking what's the domain. What's the domain of this thing? All right. I'm asking where's it increasing, decrease, or constant. So from negative infinity to 4, y values increase. And then from 4 to infinity, what are your y values doing? From 4 to infinity, what are the y values doing? They are decreasing. And is it constant anywhere? Nope. So nowhere. All right, so you just put nowhere. All right. Okay, so let's look at another example. And now it helps if you draw where it changes. Okay, put a line where it changes, and that helps. So notice what happened was in this interval. See this blue line that I drew here? It divided the x-axis into 2 intervals, right? So from here to here, it increased, and then on this side of the interval, on this side of that blue line, what happened? It decreased. And so notice from negative infinity to 4, it increased, and then from 4 to infinity, it decreased, and then it wasn't constant anywhere. Okay? All right, let's look at another one. So this was number 1. Okay, number 2. Let's look at number 2. Okay, so same idea, except this time I was supposed to have drawn an absolute value function here, but it's not symmetrical, so it's not truly an absolute value the way I have it written. But it doesn't matter. I just want to talk about where is it increasing, decreasing, or constant. All right, so first of all, what's the domain of this? What's the domain? What is the domain of this function? You had this in a previous lesson. It's negative infinity to infinity. Okay? All right, so you're asking yourself this. Where in this domain are my y values? Is my function? So where in this domain, okay, or is my function, and let's call it f of x. So where in this domain is f of x increasing, decreasing, or constant? Okay, so that's what they're asking. Where in this domain is the function increasing, decreasing, or constant? Okay? All right. So first of all, is it constant anywhere? Do you see a horizontal segment anywhere, or a horizontal ray, or horizontal line, whatever you may indicate it as? No, you don't. All right. So as I go from negative infinity to this right here, so I'm asking you to look at this. As you go from left to right, what are these y values doing? They are decreasing. Then all of a sudden, at this minimum point right here, at this minimum point, what are the y values doing? Well, let me rephrase that. Okay, from negative infinity to this minimum point, the y values are decreasing, right? And then from here, from this x value to infinity, what are those y values doing? They are increasing. So do y'all see that this blue line right here divided the x-axis, divided out my domain. This blue line divided the domain into how many intervals? 2. 1, 2. In this interval, what are those y values doing? They are decreasing. In this interval, what are the y values doing? They are increasing. And now you can answer the question. So you're going to say increasing. All right. So here's my domain. To answer this question, this function was divided into 2 intervals. In this interval, it decreases my y value, and then over here my y value increases. So from negative infinity to this x value right here, which is negative 3. What are those y values doing? Decreasing. All right, so decreasing from negative infinity to negative 3. And remember, always put parentheses. And then from negative 3 to infinity, what are those y values doing? Those y values are increasing. So negative 3 to infinity. And then where is it constant? You say nowhere. Okay, so it's constant nowhere. All right, so that's number 2. Okay, number 3. All right, so number 3, again, look at your function. So let's call this g of x. All right, so g of x. So notice that you have 2 arrows here. So you all agree that domain of this function is all real numbers? All right, so domain's all real numbers, right? Okay, now let's talk about what my y values are doing. Okay, so from here's your color pen. From negative infinity to, and then just read your graph. What are these y values doing? They're increasing. From negative infinity to this point right here, my y value increased, right? Okay, then all of a sudden what happens? What are those y values? They're constant. Okay, so where it changes, it changed here, draw a vertical line, just like this. That's going to help you, just like that. Okay? All right, so what you just found is this. What you just found is that from negative infinity to this x value right here, negative 4, what happened to your y values? They increase. Okay? And then from negative 4 to, and then what's happening to those y values? They're constant. And then all of a sudden it changes, right? Okay, so where it changes is where you put your vertical line, just like this. So I want you to notice this time. So when I did this one, how many blue vertical lines did I draw? Just one. So it divided the domain. The domain is how many intervals? 2. 1, 2. And that's what went here. Okay? 1, 2. All right? Okay. Here, how many blue lines did I draw? 2. So it divided the domain. It divided the domain to how many intervals? 3. In this interval, my y values are doing what? Increasing. In this interval right here, my y values are doing what? Constant. So write those out. Right? Increase, constant. And then over here, in this interval, this third interval, what are your y values doing? Decreasing. All right, so those blue lines divided my domain into 3 intervals. 1, 2, 3. My y values are increasing, constant, decreasing. Students, though, get confused as to what to put here, though. That's so they can see it increases, constant, decreases. Okay, they can see that. The problem is sometimes they have trouble writing the intervals. Okay, so the intervals that go here, and it might help if you do this also, the intervals that go here is the part of your domain that corresponds to it. So from negative infinity to negative 3, right? Your y values are doing what? Decreasing. That's what we got here. And then from negative 3 to infinity, what happened? Your y values increase. All right. So you may want to trace out the domain as you go across. So if you go back to what we're working on now, number 3. Okay, number 3. So the question becomes this, and here's the question. It's going to say, where state the intervals. State the intervals. Okay, state the intervals where, in this case, we call the g of x. So where g of x is increasing, decreasing, and constant. Okay? All right. So listen carefully again. So it's not that difficult. We did the hard work. This was the hard work right here. So it increased. All of a sudden it changes to constant. So I drew my vertical line. And notice I'm trying to divide the x-axis, which is the domain right here, into the intervals that will determine where it's increasing, constant, or decreasing. So increase, constant, decrease. Okay? But what goes here, though, is the part of the domain that corresponds to it. And the domain, remember, is a set of x coordinates. The x coordinates. All right, so here's how you do it. From negative infinity to negative 4, what do those y values do? Increase. Negative infinity to negative 4. Always use parentheses for increasing, decreasing, constant. Then from negative 4 to what? 3, what do those y values do? They stay constant. So I'm going to put that here. Negative 4 to 3. Constant. And then from from 3 all the way to infinity, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. So from 3 to infinity, those y values are decreasing. So from 3 to infinity, as x gets larger and larger and larger, the y values are decreasing. As I went from x equal negative 4 to x equal 3, those y values were constant. All right, so no matter what my x value was, no matter what the x coordinate was, no matter what the x coordinate is here, my y values is all the same. So from negative 4 to positive 3, my y values are constant. All right, so these are the x coordinates you put here. So that's why we reference the domain. Okay? All right, number 4. Okay, so number 4. So we have this polynomial function. Let's call it f of x. And same thing. So right away, notice I have the 2 arrows. We're going to do one in a little while where we don't have arrows. But do y'all agree, and it's important you see this, that the domain of f of x is all real numbers, negative infinity to infinity. Okay? So negative infinity, so you have an arrow here. So negative infinity to what? Infinity, right? Okay. Now, let's talk about what happens. So as I go from left to right, do this first. As I go from left to right, what's happening to these y values? They are increasing. All of a sudden, you reach a max, right? And then what starts happening? They decrease. Okay, where it changes is where you want to draw your line. Okay, so you want to figure out where in the domain your x-axis, your x-coordinates, are your changes. Okay, all right. So as I go along, I'm gonna write it out. So what happened to these y values here? As I go from negative infinity to negative 4, they did what? Increase. So I'm gonna write the word increase. Okay. Then all of a sudden, what's happening to those y values? They are doing what? Decreasing. And then it reaches a minimum, and that's where it changes. So let's draw another vertical line. Okay? So that's where it changes. So notice, so far, I have this interval, and what's happening in this interval? What's happened to your y values? My y values are decreasing. So put the word decrease. Okay? And then from 1, starting with x equal 1, that part of the domain, what's happening to these y values? They are increasing, right? And then all of a sudden, what happens? It changes. So where it changes is where you want to draw your vertical line. It helps you. You don't have to do these, but it helps. And then, okay, so remember what happened here? It did what? Increase. Okay? Increase. And then from 6 to infinity, what's happened to these y values? They are decreasing. So write the word decrease. Okay? All right. So notice that with all those changes, as I went along my domain from negative infinity to infinity, I had a change here, drew my vertical line. I had a change here, drew my vertical line. Had a change here, drew my vertical line. So notice I had a max. Wherever you have a max, there's a change. Whenever you have a min, that's a change. So from negative infinity to x equal negative 4 in my domain, okay, my y values are increasing. From negative 4 to 1, your y values are doing what? Decreasing. And then from 1 to 6, your y values are increasing. And then from 6 to infinity, your y values are decreasing. Okay? All right. So notice I drew three blue vertical lines, right? And that corresponded to where the changes occurred. And so notice that it divided my domain. It divided my domain into how many intervals? 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's your hard work, and the rest is just writing writing the answer to the question. All right, so the question is going to be this: state the intervals where we call this f of x, where f of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. All right. Okay. Now in my math lab, they're going to tell you to separate them by commas, meaning this. All right. So notice there are two places, two parts of the domain where the function's increasing, where f of x is increasing, here and here. So let's go ahead and write it. So from negative infinity to negative 4, your y values are increasing, right? Negative infinity to negative 4, comma. And then from where? From 1 to what? Tell me where it changes. 1 to 6, right? So from 1 to 6, your y values are increasing. Okay? Where is it decreasing? Well, it's decreasing in those two intervals, correct? All right, so those two intervals start when x is negative 4, all the way to x equal what? 1. Okay, the other interval, here's that interval. Then the other one's going to be starting here from 6 all the way to what? Infinity. 6 to infinity. Okay, so that's how it looks. And then where's it constant? There's no constant anywhere. There's no horizontal segment, horizontal ray anywhere. So nowhere. Okay? Now, that's how you're going to write in my math lab. Mathematically, we prefer that you say it like this. Negative infinity to negative 4 union 1 to 6. Like that. And then negative 4, 1 union 6 to infinity. But either one's fine. This is how you would write in my math lab. This is how we prefer you write it, but either one's fine. Okay? All right, so that was number 4. Number 5. It's kind of the same idea as number 4. So we're going to call this number 5. Okay, now listen carefully. All right, so let's go ahead and go from, well, first of all, determine the domain. So my domain, let's call this g of x. The domain of g of x is, notice it's negative infinity all the way to what? Infinity. All right, so you're looking at where in this domain are your y values decreasing? See, it's decreasing here, right? Okay, so have your color pin. So as I go from left to right along my x-axis, going along my domain, what's happening to these y values? They are decreasing, and all of a sudden there's a minimum. What starts happening? They increase. At that change, at that minimum, that's where I would draw this blue line like that. Okay? So right away I know this. Right away I know that in this part of my domain, what are the y values doing? Decreasing. So I'm going to write the word decrease right here. Then from negative 6, and then looks what's happening here. My y values are doing what? Increasing. And they're increasing from an x value of negative 6 to an x value of what? Negative 2. So that's where it changes, right? Okay? So from this point to this point, your y values are doing what? Increasing. What's this x coordinate right here? Negative 6. Negative 6. And what's this x coordinate right here? Negative 2. So it's increasing. Then from negative 2, so notice these y values are doing what here? Decreasing. And then here's your minimum, so that's going to be a change. So you're trying to figure out what's this x coordinate? What's this x coordinate? So I would just go ahead and draw a vertical line like this. And notice from this x coordinate to this x coordinate, which is from -2 to 3, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. All right? And then, what are your y values doing here? Increasing. And where are they increasing? When x is 3, right? All the way to x equal, I kind of messed this up right here. Let's kind of do this right here. All right, all the way to x equal 8. Let's say 8 here. Okay? And so from x equal 3, see this x value is 3, this x value is 8. So from x equal 3 to x equal 8, what are those y values doing? Increasing. And then all of a sudden for the rest, here's my final interval. So from 8 to infinity, what are those y values doing? Your y values are decreasing. Okay? So notice that when I drew those blue lines that that separated the x-axis, that separated my domain into these intervals, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 intervals. All right, so the question becomes, state the intervals where g of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. Okay, so you can go from left to right. So from negative infinity to -6, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. So negative infinity, make sure you put it in the right place though. Negative infinity to -6, your y values are decreasing. Then from -6 to 2, -2 rather, from -6 to -2, what are those y values doing? Increasing. -6 to 2. And then from 2, -2, remember my math lab, so let me go ahead and put commas because you got to do exactly what my math lab says. So I'm going to put a comma here. And then from -2 to 3, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. So -2 to 3. And then from 3 to 8, what are those y values doing? Increasing. So from 3 to 8, your y values are increasing. And then from 8 to infinity, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. So from 8 to infinity, your y values are decreasing. So notice, how many intervals did I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many do you see here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then it's constant nowhere. Okay? All right. Number 6. Okay, so number 6, we have this. I put an open circle here and I have an arrow here. What I want you to remember though is this. Let's think about the domain because I don't want you to get confused with some of these. See, we had arrows on both ends on all of these other ones. So that's why I keep asking you, if this is g of x, let's say, I keep asking you, what is the domain of g of x? Okay, so don't say, in every problem we've done at this point, 1 through 5, the domain was this, right? It was all real numbers. That's not true here because that's not an arrow. So your domain is from, notice with domain, when you ask about the domain, you do need brackets or parentheses. So brackets and parentheses are important. That's an open circle. So that's from -7, parentheses -7, all the way to infinity. So that's a domain, okay? So from -7 all the way to infinity. All right, now the question is this. State the intervals where g of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. Okay? State the intervals where g of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. All right? So, notice though, when I read these, okay, so when I read these, now listen, and go back to number 5. When I read this, my domain was all real numbers, negative infinity. So I said this. I said from negative infinity to -6, right? And on this side, I said from a to what? Infinity. And every single one that we've done up to number 5. But when I do this one, see, there's no arrow here. My domain although it's a parentheses, it starts at -7. So you're going to say this. So listen carefully. From -7 in my domain, from -7, starting at x equal -7 right here, what are my y values doing? They are decreasing. Then all of a sudden it changes to being what? Constant. Draw your blue line, just like this. Okay? Nothing different than before. Then from -1 all the way to x equal 4, what are your y values doing? Your y values are constant. So I'm going to write the word decrease, constant. All right. And then from 4, starting with x equal 4 right here, start with x equal 4, that's the x coordinate. What are your y values doing? They're increasing to x equal what? 7. All right, so write the word increase. And then from 7, now remember your domain's from -7 to infinity, so from +7 to infinity, what are those y values doing? They are staying constant. So they are staying constant. Okay? All right. Now, let me go back right here. This is where we started, right? Because that's where my domain began. So there's no -infinity to infinity. It's -7 to infinity with parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and put a vertical line here as well. All right. So notice that these blue lines divided my domain. Now remember, your domain started here, so don't think this is an interval, okay? That's not an interval because there's no graph over here. This is where your graph started. All right, so these are your intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4. Y'all agree? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so here we go. Let's answer this now. From -7 to x equal -1, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. So from -7 to -1, right? Then from x equal 1, I'm sorry, -1. From x equal -1 to x equal +4, what are those y values doing? Constant. -1 to 4. And then from 4 to 7, what are those y values doing? Increasing. 4 to 7. And then from 7 to infinity, what are those y values doing? Constant. From 7 to infinity. Okay? So notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just remember, there's nothing from -infinity to -7, right? Because that's not in your domain. Your domain's, there's no arrow here, so it's not keep on going. This is where it stopped, right? Okay. All right. So, and also remember that you could have also written, now my math lab, this is what they want, but you could have also said here, -1 to 4, union 7 to infinity. All right, so that was number 6. All right, a couple more. Number 7. Okay, so you might say, well, isn't that the one we just did? Well, almost. So notice that you had an arrow here, right? And then here there's no arrow. Okay, it's just an end point. All right, but same idea. What I need for you to do, let's call this h of x. What I need for you to do is to tell me, and this is going to be number 7. I need for you to tell me what is the domain of h of x. All right, so don't say -infinity to infinity because you know that's not true. It's parentheses, open circle, parentheses -8 all the way to, and where does it stop? At 9. Notice though that it's closed circle, so 9 is part of the graph. X equal 9 is part of the graph. So we say 9 with a bracket. So that's your domain. All right, so you want to find out where in this domain are my y values increasing, decreasing, constant. Okay? All right, so this is where it starts. I'm going to go ahead and put a blue line here. So from -8, and let's start looking. When x is -8, your y values are doing what as you go along the x-axis in your domain? Is decreasing all of a sudden it started becoming what? Constant. Okay, so this is where it changes. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Then it's constant. Your y values are constant, 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 and all of a sudden does what? Increase. So this is where it changes. I'm going to go ahead and draw my vertical line. Okay, and then what happens? It's increasing, and then it changes. So I'm going to do my vertical line. And then it stops. So still draw your vertical line, because if you don't, you're gonna mess up and say infinity, and it's not. Okay, this is where it stops. All right, so I want you to start writing out what you know now. So notice that this is not in my domain. You don't see it, right? It's only from here to here, and this is not in your domain. So how many intervals do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. So in this interval, what happened to your y values? They decrease. In this interval, what happened to your y values? They were doing what? They were staying constant. In this interval, your y values are doing what? Increasing. And in this interval, your y values are constant. And there's no interval here because that's not in the domain. Okay, because remember, your domain's only from -7 to +9. I'm sorry, -8, excuse me, to +9. Okay? All right, so now we can answer the question. State the intervals where h of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. Okay? Intervals where h of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. All right. So it starts here. Remember, your domain starts at -8. So from -8 to -3, from -8 to -3, what are your y values doing? Decreasing. So I'm going to go ahead and write that out. So parentheses -8 to -3, right? Okay, right here. And then from -3 to +3, what are your y values doing? Constant. So from -3 to +3, my y values are constant. Okay, and then from 3 to 6, what are those y values doing? Increasing. 3 to 6. And then from 6 to 9, what are those y values doing? Constant, so comma, 6 to 9. And then that's it, right? Because there's nothing else. So notice I went from my domain of -8 to 9, and I did that, -8 to 9. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? All right. And again, remember, you can always write this when you're using union. So you could say -3 to +3 union 6 to 9. All right. Now I want to remind you of this. See how in the domain we need to be careful with our parentheses and bracket? But we're talking about increasing, decreasing, constant. It's always going to be parentheses. Okay? So you're basically saying in this open interval right here, in this open interval, what's happening to your y values? They are decreasing. In this open interval, so you see parentheses mean open intervals. In this open interval, your y values are constant. In this open interval right here, your y values are increasing, and in this open interval, your y values are constant. All right. So again, you may want to use colored. Let me try and find some. Okay, you may want to use colored markings along the x-axis to help you. When you do that, it kind of makes it a little bit becoming messy. So if you want to, you can say, all right, in this interval right here, my y values decrease, and then here they change in this interval. So I'm using a different one. Your y values are constant, and so on. All right, if you want to do something like that, that's fine. It just, most students don't. They just prefer to draw this vertical line to separate the domain into the necessary intervals. Okay. All right, and then finally, let's look at number 8. Look at number 8. Okay, so notice I have 2 arrows on either end, so you should be able to tell me, if I call this h of x, you should be able to tell me what the domain of h of x is. Domain of h of x is from, notice the arrow going this way, so it's from -infinity all the way to what? Positive infinity. All right, so negative infinity all the way to positive infinity. All right, so as I go along my domain from left to right, and remember, I'm going from negative infinity all the way to positive infinity. So let's talk about what's happening to your y values. So y'all see as I go from along my domain from left to right, my y values here are doing what? Constant. All of a sudden it did what? Decrease. So that's where it changes. So go ahead at this point right here where it changed, go ahead and draw your blue line. So now I have this interval. So in this interval, what are the y values doing? Constant. So I'm going to write the word constant. Okay? And then from x equal negative 3, starting with x equal negative 3, what are those y values doing? Decreasing. And they're decreasing. All of a sudden they do what? Constant. So the change is here at x equal 4. So at this point, x is negative 3. At this point, x is 4. So from negative 3 to 4, your y values did what? Decrease. And then from x equal 4, and this x coordinate is 7. So from x equal 4 to x equals 7, what did your y values do? They stayed constant. Okay? And then from 7, remember your domain's all the way to infinity. From 7 to infinity, what are those y values doing? Increasing. Okay? So here's what we have. Here's what we know. This interval is constant. This interval, my y values are decreasing. This interval right here, my y values are constant. And in this interval, my y values are increasing. So notice that when I went across and I did those blue lines where it changed, I separated my domain into 1, 2, 3, 4 intervals. All right, so now we can answer the question. State the domain where h of x is increasing, decreasing, constant. All right, so where is h of x increasing, decreasing, constant? So when I went along here from negative, remember your domains, negative infinity to infinity. So from negative infinity to x equal negative 3, what were those y values? Constant. Okay? And then at this point, that's where it started changing, right? Okay, so this x value right here is negative 3. And so from negative 3 to x equal 4, your y values were, so from negative 3 to x equal 4, your y values decreased. All right, so it's constant from negative infinity to negative 3. All right, so in this open interval here from negative infinity to negative 3, your y values are constant right here. All right, and then from negative 3 all the way to positive 4 in that open interval, your y values decrease. So negative 3 to 4. And then from 4 to, that is 7. So from 4 to 7, your y values were constant. 4 to 7. And then from 7 to infinity, your y values increased. So from 7 to infinity. Okay? And that is how you determine where functions are increasing, decreasing, or constant. So hopefully that helps you understand this a little bit better, how to determine where functions are increasing, decreasing, or constant.